Welcome. I'm glad you decided that you want to learn how to program in Java. There's a couple of things that you need to know about Java, and how I'm going to approach this is a little bit different than other videos that you might find out there. One, we're going to not only talk about the language itself, but we're going to talk about kind of what's happening behind the scenes. I think it's important, and it's a fundamental philosophy of mine, that we learn not only how to program, but why we program. It's too easy to go out and learn, say in 24 hours, how to program in a language. Sure, I'm guessing most of you that are looking at these videos are thinking to yourself, I'm pretty smart, and I know you probably are. And you can probably figure it out on your own if you really gave it a shot. But the important part is we want to know why we're making decisions, because in the end, it's when you go and write software, you want to write good software, you want to write efficient software, you want to have a good reason why you're doing it, not just I can do it. Anybody can learn that, but you're going to look and go beyond that in this session. So first, some of the logistics of this is we need to have some way to be able to actually write Java programs. The first thing you need to have is you have to have the Java development kit. On Oracle, you can go and download this for free, and it works for any kind of installation that you might have. So if you have an operating system of Windows, or you have Linux, or you have Mac, you can download those and you can install it for free. The nice thing about this is that you can utilize this, and once it's installed, it should just run, okay? So the first thing you have to notice is that they have you accept your license agreement here at the top. This isn't always easily seen, and in fact, you'll try to download it and it'll say you've forgotten to accept the license because it seems almost hidden. So you click on that, and now once you've accepted their license, you can download whatever version you have. In this case, I have a 64-bit version, so I can download this executable, and I can save it to my downloads folder or onto my desktop or whatever. If you're running a Mac, same thing, and then you just double click on it and it will install for you. This is the part that allows you to actually compile the code. There's a couple of things that'll happen, and we'll kind of go through some drawings later, but when we write Java code, it's written in English, and then when we go to compile it, it gets compiled down to bytecode, and this is what allows it to be cross-platform. Because it's in bytecode, that means that it needs to be interpreted at the bottom to get down to the machine level. In a big sense, what that means is that I can write programs on a Windows machine, I can compile it and send it to you if you're on a Mac or if you're on a Linux installation somewhere, and you can run it there and it'll work just fine, and vice versa. And that's kind of the beauty of how Java works. This is also very true for the .NET platform. It runs in a similar fashion. It has an interpreter, and that's what it's doing, is it's trying to say, well, where can I take this code and then interpret it for whatever machine I'm on? And so it compiles it down to the machine code, i.e. the zeros and ones. And so that's where we go from there. Once you have that installed, you want to go and download the Eclipse IDE. So an IDE, if you don't know what that means, is an integrated development environment. What this allows us to do is it allows us to write code. Sure, we could go and we could use Notepad, or we can use TextEdit or something that's already built into our operating system. But what this does is it gives us a number of different things. It allows us to, of course, write our code, but also it will check our syntax, which, if you're wondering what syntax means, that just means what are the rules? What are the rules of this language to make it right? We have rules all the time. If you think about English, we have nouns and verbs and adjectives and where they should go, and they need to have punctuation. Writing code is the exact same way. And that's what this is doing. So we have Eclipse. This allows us to do that. It helps us also to debug, which is a kind of another word that just essentially says, how do we find the errors or the exceptions that show up in our code when we write programs? Okay, so we can download this. In the newest version, if you click on the download, there's a couple of different options, but the most recent version is Neon, which you can download, and it will actually find what you're running. So if you're running Mac or you're running Windows, it'll actually download or show you which download you should be getting. If you want to go and find a different version, you can. This is all free software. So you can download it, install it, and it will just run for you, which is a nice thing. You want this because then you can utilize this on any machine you want, and you can move from different machines. Now, I'll have to tell you, there's one caveat with Eclipse. I use this in my classroom, and I like it because it's an enterprise level IDE. However, there are other ones like NetBeans or JGrasp or BlueJ, and those are all wonderful editors, and they're all utilize different things. The reason why I like this one though is it has a number of plugins that are used, and it's a full featured, and it's really pretty stable. So there's no other issues that I've found that kind of crop up when you use this IDE. So it's just something I like to use. But if you plan on using Eclipse, and try to show you a walkthrough so you know how it works. Once you download it, you install it, you click on the installer just like you would. So you can click on this, it'll pop up and ask you if you want to download it. You can save it to your downloads folder or onto your desktop again. And then once you have it downloaded and installed, you can work with this program. The reason why I have you get the Java development kit first is because Eclipse relies on the JDK to actually run. And we'll take a look at where that exists inside of the program so that you know that it's there and it's running properly. By the way, if you're running a Mac, it automatically has the JDK already installed for you. So you don't necessarily have to go and get version 8, but if you want to, you can, and then you just change the library, which we'll take a look at in a moment. Okay? Once you have these programs installed, what you should get is you should get either an icon on your desktop, or you'll be able to search through your search bar for Eclipse. And when you double click on it, it should come up with this loading screen, and then it'll ask you what your workspace is. Now this is important because this is where everything is stored. Essentially what it's creating is it's creating a folder for you. And this is a really nice thing because it says, I'm going to contain all of your projects in one place. And there's a little idiosyncrasies that go along with this, so hang with me for a second and we'll take a look at that. But you can specify where you want to have it. And so for example, if I want to say, this is my video workspace, I can do that. I can say okay, and it'll generate this folder for me and essentially have all the metadata, i.e. it just has kind of the listing of all the projects that are within it, and then it will display for me. Now the first time you open up the program, it's going to look something like this. You're going to have kind of this welcome screen, and it kind of gives you a whole bunch of different options. Now you can go through and it will create a program for you, and it'll create a Java project for you, and you can even work with the Git repository and so forth, which is a nice thing. Here's the marketplace, so if you can find different plugins that can help you do certain functions a little faster, those things are all there. But what we're going to go to first is we're going to go to the Workbench. So if we click on this, it should take us to a screen that looks something like this. Our Package Explorer is one of the sections we care about. This middle section right here is where we're going to write all our code. And then eventually we're going to see down here along the bottom, we're going to see our console, or what shows up when we actually write a program. Okay, so that should show up down below too. Now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new project. We have a couple of options here, but one of the easiest, if you want to go through the File menu, is you go to File, New, and then go to Java Project. When I download from Eclipse, I usually choose the Java IDE for Java developers, Eclipse for Java developers. And the reason why I choose that one is so that it comes up with Java Project. There's a number of different projects you could create. As you can see, I've installed other things on my Eclipse, but you can have things for Python, you can have things for C++, you can have things for other languages. And so that's why I do Java, so that it comes up automatically and I don't have to search for it. So we can say new Java project, and it will pop up and tell us I want it to actually run. Now, to create a new project, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, all right, I want to have this as my first project. So I'm going to call this project 1. There's a couple of things. Put in the default location, which is where I created my workspace. You can change that if you want it to be stored somewhere else. But remember, I want to keep everything all together. And this is kind of a nice way to remember that. Then we have our execution environment. Remember, I downloaded and installed Java 8. By default, then I have this 1.8 installed. There's other ones as well that you could utilize, but for my purposes, I'll just use Java 8, which is fine. And then at the end, I'm going to create different folders for my source and my class files. What that means is that when I write my code, that's going to be my source folder. And then when it compiles, it goes to the class folder. And we'll take a look at that too. And then all we do is say finish. So when it generates this, we just get a folder. Inside of this folder, it tells us here's our source folder, and then here's our system library that we're using. It's important that you have both of these things because the source, whatever you write, is going to be looking for the system folder to be able to make it run. So now I can either right click and say new and then go to class, or I can go to file and say new class, or I can even click on this little plus up here and say new Java class. Now you might be saying to yourself, what is a Java class? Everything in Java is a class. This is an object-oriented programming language, which means that we have classes, which are basically generic templates. We'll revisit this again at some point. And then we have objects, which are specific instances of those classes. Now, if you're scratching your head and you're saying, what? Don't be afraid. We'll talk about this later on. But for right now, know that you need to create a class. Everything has to have a class so that it can be compiled and it can be run. So we're going to create a class just like we did our project, but this time we're going to say file, we're going to say new, and we're going to say class. Now this time we're going to say I want to put it inside of my source folder. We'll talk about packages later, but for right now we're just going to put it in the default package, which it'll give us a warning, but that's okay. Now for this class we're going to give it a name, and we have to give it a name that has all letters or numbers. But it cannot start with a number. It can start with some special characters, but not all. But typically for best practice, I would say just use letters and use an uppercase letter to start your class name. It just makes sense. It's a convention, and it ends up being something that you'll repeat over and over again. Okay? And so let's say, for example, I'm going to call this class driver. And there's my warning. Don't use the default package. And it's only because you want to be able to put things in their own folders that are similar to one another. So we'll look at that later, but for right now, this is okay. Now, you're going to see a couple of things. One, this modifier, public. We have to have it public so that it can be seen. If we don't have it as a public class, then it won't actually run. So we have to have it so that it can be seen. We don't worry about abstract or final for right now because we're not going to make them either of those, and we haven't talked about them yet. And then we have this superclass. Superclass means it's the parent. And everybody's like, what's a parent? What's inheritance? That's a lot right now. But what it means is that everything comes from an object class. Everything kind of flows from there. So you can imagine your parents. What do you get from your parents? Maybe it's your eye color. Maybe it's your hair color. In this case, from the object class, we get a bunch of functions or methods that we can utilize. And we'll look at that in a second, but not yet. And then finally, it will actually generate certain things for us. And in this case, I wanted to actually create this public static void main. Now this seems long and arduous, and trust me, if you type it out a few times, you'll think the same thing. But when we say finish, this is what it'll look like. It'll look like this, public class driver. Notice how this one, driver.java, here in our package explorer, and then public class driver right here, this name has to match this name. They have to be the same so that it can compile, and when it runs, it can find this class name. Remember when I said we're going to put them in two different folders? We'll look at that in a second too. It created this for us, this public static void main, string, and then these brackets, args. It created it for us so that we didn't have to type it out. But this is where the program starts. The main method is where everything begins. And then inside of here, we have this auto-generated method stub. Notice how it has these two slashes, then it's in green. That means it's a comment. This is a single line comment when we have two forward slashes. If you're wondering about forward slash versus backslash, forward slash means we're leaning forward. Backslash means we're leaning backwards. And then notice how these are in purple. That means that these are called reserved words. And we'll follow up on that again later too. But that means you can't create anything else that uses these words. They're only used for the language themselves. And then we have these brackets. Now these things will become more and more prevalent as we go along, but for right now, notice how we have one open, we have one closed, we have one open, we have one closed. For every open one, we have to have a closed curly brace, and that just means what's contained within this method. or in this case, what's contained within this class. So let's take away this comment for right now because we don't need it. And I want to be able to print something out to the screen. And the most typical thing I'm going to print out is called Hello World. This you can find examples galore, but it looks something like this. And notice what happens. I say system, and this is a class. And then these are the methods that are called within that, or that I could call within it. All of these are within the system class. And I'm going to use the out. See how we have this here? The nice part about this program and why we use this versus, say, using Notepad or TextEdit is that it gives us what's called IntelliSense. So it tells us a little bit about what it is that we're actually doing. So we had system, then we have out, and if we look at this, it tells us this is the standard output stream. And so we're able to actually print stuff out to the console, and that's what we're going to try to do. And from there, we can say print. So we're going to say print line, which there's a difference between print and print line, where print just prints it out to the screen, keeps the cursor on the same line, whereas print line prints it out to the screen and puts the cursor to the next line. Okay, but to do this, notice we have print line with all these different things in here. So we could print out anything we wanted in lots of ways. But what we do to call a method is we have an open parentheses, and then I want to print out just hello world, so I have to put that in double quotes, and I say hello world. And then for every open double quotes, we have to have a closed double quotes, and for every open parentheses, we have to have a closed parentheses, and then to end the line, we have to have a semicolon. Notice, since I don't have a semicolon, this is already giving me an error. And in fact, what it's telling me is, if you look at this message, it says multiple markers at this line, syntax error, insert a semicolon to complete the block statement. I can put a semicolon, it'll fix it. Notice I actually didn't compile this program, and the reason why is it's doing real-time compiling. While I'm writing my code, it's compiling, which is a big deal. Other programs, you have to go up and you have to say compile. Then it'll tell you if you have an error. And then if you fix your errors, then you can run your program. This one, it's compiling as you type. And then once you're done and you save the program, you can run it. So we can save it here. We can say Control S, or we can say File, Save. Notice whenever we make a change, it'll tell us that it's been changed with this little star here. Once we fix that and we save it, so if we say Control S, the little star goes away. Now to run this program, we can just go up and say run. So we can say run, run. We can say Control F11, or we can click on this little run button here. If we say that, then we should have hello world. And this ends the first video. Thank you for watching. We'll be back soon.